everyone, it's Alice, and today I thought we could do a whole video all about historical fiction. So I know historical fiction is quite a broad genre, and I have loads of books to show you today. I have a bunch of books that I want to recommend to you, a little bit of something for everyone, and then I have a TBR stack that I thought I would also show you. I think this is gonna be a little bit of a longer video, so maybe like grab yourself a cup of tea or a snack or something. I've done a couple of these types of videos before, like I've done one on adventure fiction and dystopian and apocalyptic books, which I will leave a link to in the description if you haven't seen them and you're interested. Now, I feel like historical fiction is one of those genres that very often overlap with others, so there's often a lot of other stuff going on in historical fiction books, which I think is great, and I just love having like a historical setting to a story. I love maybe possibly learning a little bit about that time period and how people lived, and I feel like historical fiction is really easy to get lost in. Anyways, let me show you some of my faves. We have a lot of them, so we should just get into it. So firstly, we have the wonderful A Long Petal of the Sea by Isabel Allende. This is a translated book. It's translated from Spanish, and it starts off in Spain in the 1930s when civil war grips the country, and we meet this young widow and her brother-in-law, and they end up escaping the country together along with hundreds of thousands of others. And after many years away from home, they end up settling down in Chile. This is the kind of book where I immediately knew I was going to like it. Like, I was one chapter in and I just knew, and then the further into this I got, the more I loved it. I think what makes this so special is that the writing is really good and the characters feel like real people, and you really end up caring about them and you follow them for like a pretty big portion of their lives. I really liked the historical aspects of this book as well. We get to see like Spain in the 30s, and we go to France and Chile, and I just feel like this book really captures what it's like to have to leave your homeland, and it's all about love and family and what war does to people. And it also has a guest appearance by Pablo Neruda, which is really cool. Secondly, we have got a classic that I'm sure a lot of you have read already, and it is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. And this is set in the Deep South in America in the 1930s, where we meet this young girl whose father is a lawyer, and he ends up working on this case where a black man has been accused of raping a white woman. I know that this book is a part of a lot of people's curriculum, so a lot of people write it for school, and I feel like there's a good reason for that, because this really is a very good book, and it's a great book to discuss. There are a lot of layers in here. Like, on one hand, this story is about this young girl who is trying to figure out the world and her place in it, but then it's also about her father and this case, and it discusses race and class and justice and history, and I just think it's a really solid book, and if you haven't read it yet, you really should. Then we actually have one of my favorite graphic novels, and it is The Complete Mouse by Art Spiegelman. This is all about a son and his father, and it's about living through the horrors of the Holocaust. So we get to see these interactions between a son and a father that he doesn't completely understand, and then the father tells him the story of the war and what it was like to live as a Polish Jew in Hitler's Europe. And the art is quite simple in this one, but it's really nice, and the Jews are portrayed as mice and the Nazis are cats. I remember this was one of the first graphic novels that I ever read, and I feel like I picked a good one to start with because this one is amazing. I remember really liking the way that the characters are depicted and how they're all different animals. Like, that works really well. And the story sort of shifts between this father talking to his son, and then we look back at the father's past, and it's the kind of book that is hard to read because it deals with a very heavy topic, but because we switch between sort of the past and the present, it makes it just about bearable without it glossing over anything. And I just think this is so good. It's maybe my favorite graphic novel ever. Then we have got something a little bit lighter, and it is The Diviners by Libba Bray. And this is just a really fun book. It's set in the 1920s in New York, where we meet Evie, who has been sent to live with her uncle in the city. And she's really excited because, you know, 1920s glitz and glamour in the big city is like a dream come true. But, of course, Evie has a secret. She has this supernatural ability that has given her nothing but trouble so far. But then a girl is murdered and the uncle is asked to help figure it out, and he asks Evie to help him, and she realizes that her gift might be like a good thing after all. In the background of all of this, there's also this thing that's being awakened that is really, really scary, but you'll have to read the book to find out what that is. I feel like this is the perfect book to just get lost in. Like, you can just curl up on the couch with this and get immersed. And the setting of New York in the 1920s is obviously great. It's really vibrant, and it was one of my favorite parts of this book. I think the main character is really fun to read about, and I really enjoyed all of the supernatural stuff in here. Like, it's really cool. And it is quite unsettling as well. Like, the scary thing that I mentioned is actually like pretty scary, but it's also really fun and mysterious, and I just really enjoyed this book. It's very entertaining, if you know what I mean. Like, it's not too deep, it's just very entertaining and enjoyable. And if you like this, it's actually the first in a series, so there is more if you want more. Next, we have got this little, quite underrated book, in my opinion, and it is Sometimes a River Song by Avril Joy. And this is set in Arkansas in the 1930s in this riverboat community, where we meet this young girl whose biggest dream is learning how to read, because she feels like this will offer her a life away from the cruelty of her father and a life away from the river. So a thing to note about this book is that it's written in dialect, which might take you a minute to get into, but I promise you it's worth it. It's so good. I loved the little community that we get to know in this book, and like, it's really atmospheric, and the river is just described amazingly, and I loved the main character. I feel like she's really stuck with me, and this is just a beautiful and kind of painful coming of age story that I just really wish more people would read, because it's just so good. A book that's actually quite similar to this that I know a lot of people have read and loved like me is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. This is set in North Carolina in the 50s and 60s, where we meet this girl who is living out in the marsh all by herself, and her life is like the stuff of legend in the nearest town. And then in the late 60s, a body is discovered, and everyone immediately suspects the infamous Marsh Girl. The main character is really what does it for me in this one. Like, I immediately felt a connection with her, and I just loved following her throughout her life. And it's both beautiful and painful to read about, because in some ways she's so adult because she's had to fend for herself for most of her life, but then she's also so naive and young in a lot of ways. I think the writing in here is really good, and I love the way it describes the nature, and I could really picture this whole book in my head like a movie, which is kind of funny because they're actually making a movie now, which I'm both nervous about and excited for. There is also a little bit of a mystery in here, but the main part of the book is really just about this girl and her growing up. I really feel like if you've read this one and loved it, you have to try this one as well. They are different in some ways, obviously, but they're both about young girls, and they're coming of age stories, and they have a lot of the same vibe and atmosphere to them, if that makes sense. So if you like this, you gotta try this. It's really good. Then we have got a new favorite of mine that I read very recently, and it is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. And this is set in Greece during the Age of Heroes, and we meet Patroclus, who is a young, awkward prince who does something, kind of accidentally, that gets him sent into exile, and he's sent to live in the court of King Peleus, who is the father of Achilles. And Achilles and Patroclus become lifelong companions, and they eventually end up in Troy. So it's basically a retelling of parts of the Iliad. The writing in this book is just, oh my gosh, it's beyond. It's so gorgeous. It's impossible to describe, so you really just have to try it out for yourself to see. The setting of historical Greece in this is great, and there are some fantasy elements, which is really cool, but the main story really is about love. And when even me, who is the most unromantic person on the planet, gets it, then you know it's good. Next, we have got a book that I read last year and loved, and it is The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. And this is set like over several decades, like between the 50s and the 90s. And it starts off with us meeting these twins who grow up in this southern black community. And they end up running away at the age of 16, and they end up living very different lives. One ends up having this dark-skinned child with a man, and the other one ends up passing for white in this affluent California neighborhood. So this is one of those fantastic generational novels where we get to follow not just these twins, but both of their daughters, which is very interesting. It explores a lot of different themes and it touches on a lot of different things, but it never felt overcrowded to me. Like, I feel like it handled everything really well, and it was never trying too hard to say something, if you know what I mean. I loved the characters in here and seeing them on their journeys and through their troubles, and it's a really well-written book. Then we are going to take a trip to Australia with The Strays by Emily Bitto. This is set in Melbourne in the 1930s, where we meet this young girl who befriends three sisters at school, and she becomes really entangled in their lives, and she spends a lot of time at their house with their very eccentric, artsy parents, and these parents have a lot of eccentric, artsy friends and people staying over a lot of the time. This is again just a really compelling and interesting book filled with great characters, and I remember loving the way that this describes all of the different dynamics between all the people in this book and how it captures that moment in your life when you're going from being a girl to becoming a young woman. Like, it's described in this kind of like painful but beautiful way. The house this is set in, like where most of this takes place, is also great, and I feel like you get this little peek into 1930s Melbourne and like the art world, which is really cool. Moving on, we have got this book, which is set in the Caribbean, and it's Sugar Money by Jane Harris. And this is set in 1765, if I remember correctly, and it's about these two brothers who are slaves, who are charged by their French master to go to another island to steal back a group of slaves that he feels belongs to him but are currently being claimed by the British. I really enjoy the time period this is set in, and I felt like the islands in this book were captured really well. The story is about these two brothers, and I loved how the author captures their love but also the tension in their relationship, and the story is told from the perspective of the younger brother, and I remember loving that you really feel that character's age. Like, he's quite young and you can tell that he is. Like, sometimes when you read books from like young people's perspectives, they seem much older, but this kid really is just a kid, and it's wonderful but also a little bit of a heartbreaking book, I'm not gonna lie, but it's well worth the read. It's really, really good. Second to last of my favorites, we have got Washington Black by Essie Adujan, and this is again set in the Caribbean, and it's about, again, this young boy who lives on a plantation and he is a slave, and his master's brother comes to visit, and this boy is chosen to be his like helper or manservant, and this brother actually ends up taking him with him when he leaves, which his master is not okay with, but this obviously changes this boy's whole life. This is like a coming of age story wrapped up in an adventure, and it explores a lot of different themes like love, humanity, friendship, slavery, race, and just all kinds of things, and it takes us all over the world, which is really cool. And I loved all of the different settings in this book and how they were described, and again, it's the kind of book that's really easy to get engrossed in, and it really feels like you're going on this adventure and you get to see all of these different places. Lastly, we have got The Mountains Sing by Nguyen Phan Quamai, and this is a generational novel where we follow the Tran family, and it starts off in Vietnam in the 1920s in the middle of their land reform, and we follow them from this time all the way through the Vietnam War. This is just fantastic and also heartbreaking. The story focuses on the relationship between this young girl and her grandmother, which I really loved. I loved the characters in here, and the backdrop of Vietnam is fantastic. You get to learn quite a lot about their history and culture, and obviously there are parts in here that are hard to read because a lot of it is set during like conflict and war times, but it's also a story about family and love, and kindness. Moving on to my TBR stack, I have got 7 or 8 books to show you, and I had to like narrow it down a little bit. Like I have more historical fiction novels on my shelves waiting to be read, quite a lot of them actually, but I can't show you all of them. So I just took a look at my shelves and picked out the ones that caught my eye today. So first we have The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr. and this says it's a book about forbidden love, and it's about these 2 young enslaved men who I think grow up together and they end up having this romantic relationship, and it's not really seen as a negative thing until this person comes to the plantation and starts preaching God's word, and it's suddenly seen as like sinful. This is one of those books that I'm really looking forward to because it sounds great, but then I also feel like there's heartbreak in store, which I'm maybe not looking forward to so much. Secondly, we have Things in Jars by Jess Kidd, and this is a book that has been recommended to me so many times, so I have kind of high hopes, I'm not gonna lie. It's about this female detective who gets this baffling case of this missing young woman who is said to have like supernatural abilities or something, and the search for this girl takes this detective into the seedy underworld of Victorian London, which sounds great. And I have a feeling that this is kind of like dark, which I'm excited for. Then we have got The Confession by Jessie Burton, and to be honest, I don't really know what this book is about. I just want to read it because I read The Miniaturist by Burton and I really enjoyed it. I also really like this cover, like it's really cool. I think it starts off in the 80s in London, and it's about this woman who meets this like Hollywood famous successful writer, and she gets like caught up with that person and they end up in LA, and then there's a secret that someone in present day is trying to figure out. I don't really know, but I really enjoyed The Miniaturist and I've heard a lot of good things about this, so I'm excited. Next, we have got this lovely looking book. It is The Glass House by Eve Chase, and this is a little bit of a mystery novel, I think. It's about this baby, like this girl baby, who is found out in the woods abandoned, and these woods are by this manor house, and the people who live in that house take this girl in, and they're really happy to have a child, so they just like take her in, don't tell anyone about it, and raise her as their own. And then I think another body, like a dead person, is found in the same woods, and that connects to this girl somehow, and it threatens to like spill the secret or whatever. And I guess the main mystery is not just the dead body, but also who this girl actually is, which sounds very intriguing. Then we have got a time travel novel, and it is What the Wind Knows by Amy Harmon. And this is about this woman who somehow ends up in Ireland in 1921, just as the country is on the brink of war. And she, like, the people, wherever she wakes up, people think that she's this boy's long-lost mother, and she just assumes that role because, like, what else are you supposed to do? And it says that this is also a romance novel, so I'm assuming she maybe falls in love with someone, like, in the midst of Ireland's war for independence. Next, we have got a book that I find kind of hard to explain because I've never fully grasped what it's about. I've just heard it's really good, and it is Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield. And I think this is about a girl who is presumed drowned, and she's found in the Thames in London, and then like someone brings her corpse somewhere, and then she wakes up, but no one can figure out who she is. Like, she won't speak, and I think 3 different families end up like claiming her for whatever reason, and that's all I really know. I've just, you know, this has been recommended to me. A lot of people say it's great, and like, who doesn't want to read something that looks like this? Second to last, we have The Mercies by Kieran Millwood Hargrave. And one of the reasons I'm really interested in this is that it's set in Norway. It's set in the north of Norway, I think, on this island where all of the men die in a storm. I'm assuming they're out at sea or something and they all die. And the women are obviously left and they have to fend for themselves and run this little community. And I think it works quite well until this man from Scotland shows up and ruins everything. I think he's some sort of like religious person, like a priest or something, and he's used to burning witches. and I'm sure he can find a lot of what he believes are those in this village of independent women, which sounds horrifying, but also very interesting. And it's always cool to read like books set in Norway. Lastly, we have got a book that I got very recently, and it is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. And this is about Shakespeare and his wife Agnes and their child Hamnet, who I think maybe dies. I don't really know. But I think that he inspires the play Hamlet. I'm just assuming all of this. I don't really know. It's set in 1596, and I've heard amazing things about this book. Everyone says it's great, so I want to read it. Okay, everyone. That was a lot of books, I know, but we've made it to the end. I hope you enjoyed it, and I would love to know what your favorite historical fiction novel is and what your favorite historical period to read about is. Maybe like top 3. Maybe that could be fun. As usual, links to my Patreon and other social media will be in the description if you're interested, and I will see you soon. Bye!